Hello and welcome to episode 136 of Page One, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Tarek.
And I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing journeys, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. This is one of a special series of episodes where we're following a book's journey from being written to being published to possibly even being made into a film. And we've spoken to some brilliant agents, editors, and even Hollywood managers for this series of episodes. And today we're speaking with our first editor in the series, a commissioning editor, Miranda Jewess.
Yeah, this is quite exciting. So we're moving away from the agents now and we're looking into what happens after your book's been picked up by an agent. How does it get picked up by a publisher? What's the process there? What do they look for when they're looking at these manuscripts, where you're talking about going to auctions? What kind of stuff do you consider advances? All the kind of financial stuff that authors really want to know about. And Miranda's a really great example. She's a fantastic editor at Viper Books. She's worked with a couple of our past guests we've had on the podcast before. Janice Hallett with The Appeal and Catriona Ward with Last House on Needless Street. So some really big names in the crime and horror genre.
Yeah, and it's just really interesting hearing, you know, when you're sitting there writing your book, knowing how to attract an editor can be something quite distant from you. You're more concerned to how will I get an agent, but it is interesting hearing about the interaction between the agents and editors and what commissioning editors are looking for, you know, what trends are important, what sort of stories they are interested in. So hopefully this episode is of interest as it was to me, and we'll get straight into the interview with Miranda now.
So on with the podcast.
Now, when we have authors on the podcast, I always start with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer? But did you always want to be a commissioning editor?
No.
It'd be a very specific ambition if you did.
No, I didn't even really want to be in publishing. It was kind of an accident, really. I think I wanted to be a pathologist.
Okay.
Nice.
But I never really got my act together to do a medical conversion course. And I just sort of ended up back in the day when there were graduate traineeships for publishing, which is aging me somewhat. I think I was the last generation before the recession. So I just got on that. And to be honest, I never got out of it, which is fine. I really enjoy my job, but no, it's not something I ever thought I would do. I think I thought I'd be playing with dead bodies or digging up very ancient dead bodies.
Nice. Yeah, I wanted to be a CSI agent based on watching CSI, and then you find out it's nothing like that at all in real life, and it's actually quite boring.
No, it's. I mean, I did
instead. I mean, Tarek, you're showing how young you are there as well, which is depressing. But,
yeah. But what was it that made you want to? What drew you away from anthropology then into writing world?
Well, I mean, apart from accidentally ending up in publishing, I mean, I started in military history publishing, which I loved, and I kind of ended up in fiction, I suppose, by accident. I ended up in crime and thrillers because that's the area of fiction I've always read for pleasure. I think I've mentioned on another podcast that I didn't see my dad very much because he worked very late, but when I did see him, it was normally he would come when I was having my bath, and he would sit and he would read Sherlock Holmes stories to me in the bath. And he started with The Speckled Band when I was 4, which made me terrified of bell pulls and like snakes coming down, which that snake cannot do. That snake cannot come down vertically. It's an anatomical impossibility, but I didn't know that at the time. So I suppose crime has just been, I think it's very difficult in publishing to publish books in a genre you don't like or that you're not automatically drawn to. And I've done lots of different genres and I've enjoyed a lot of them, and they've kind of opened up new areas to me. But I know that if I can only take one book with me on a holiday, it's going to be a book with a dead body in it.
And you did this graduate traineeship that you said. I mean, what did that actually involve on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, I suppose a lot of grunt work, really, but also I started at a very small publishing house in Gloucestershire, and they really kind of throw you in at the deep end. So on sort of the third day, they were having me input corrections directly into the final layouts of a book. And at this point, I did not know the difference between a hyphen and an emerald and an N rule. Had no idea. So I did a find replace and every single hyphen in the book turned into an N rule. And then I had to spend days going back through it and correcting every single hyphen and N rule in this book about the logistics on the Western Front. So that definitely haunts my nightmares. But it was just a lot of author care. It was a lot of admin, but it was a lot of reading. We didn't have money to pay for proofreaders, so I proofread huge volumes of books on tanks. And by the end, I was commissioning books of my own. Again, a lot of books about tanks, and the AK-47, which is my favorite automatic firearm.
And how did you then work your way to Viper, which is where you're at just now?
Yes. Well, after I moved to London, because in publishing, if you want to, you basically have to be in London. At least in those days. Now it's a lot more spread out, which is great. But in those days, essentially, if you wanted to be in mainstream commercial publishing, it was London. And I went to work for Titan, which is known for its comics at the time. It was quite a small fiction department, but it grew. And I was doing science fiction and fantasy and a lot of very big movie tie-in books. That's a large part of their list, and film tie-in books. So if you want to read a film tie-in book for Grimm or anything really, Blacklist, Star Wars, then they will be publishing it. And they also did some crime, and they did more crime after I arrived because I enjoyed it so much. I did a lot of new Sherlock Holmes novels and a lot of general commercial crime for supermarkets. But then I went on maternity leave with my daughter, and while I was on leave, this senior commissioning editor job at Serpent's Tail came up. Serpent's Tail is the literary fiction imprint of Profile Books, which is a large independent publisher. And they wanted someone to do crime and thrillers in the Serpent's Tail list, and I went and got the job. And then quite soon after I arrived, I told them this wasn't going to work and they had to do a new imprint. Because the Serpent's Tail list is very sort of rightly lauded as being a real home for literary fiction, new sort of transgressive fiction, very sort of avant-garde memoir. But they wanted me to buy commercial crime. And the readership is just too different. If you're talking on Twitter to a group of people who want the Essex Serpent, they're not the same market as the person who's going to buy the new commercial thriller. It doesn't work. And I was lucky. They went, okay.
I was going to say, because obviously Viper is very new. It's like November 2019 it launched. So
yes.
I mean, what was that like, heading that up and getting a chance to kind of launch your own imprint from the start even?
I mean, I don't think I'll get to do that again. I think that was my one new imprint probably in my career, which I'm fine with, to be honest. It's quite stressful. I mean, it was November 19. It was lovely. We had a nice party. It was all very exciting, and also because, in a sense, there wasn't a huge amount of pressure, because the sort of the ethos of Profile was that we will support you to build it, and if it doesn't make a lot of money, or even if it makes a lot, probably they would have been like, well, it needs time. These things need time to grow. But then, of course, we published our first book just as everybody went into lockdown, and that was a bit worrying. But actually, it seemed to have turned out rather well.
Yeah.
In the end.
We'll get on to how well it's turned out later on. But I mean, in your role then, as a sort of day-to-day job, what are you doing now in your day job?
Well, in my day job, in normal times, or my day job right now, coming back from maternity leave?
In normal times.
Normal times. Well, my principal role is to acquire new books and to edit the ones I have. So acquiring is being sent manuscripts 99% of the time from agents, which obviously serves as a kind of a funneling process for the manuscripts with the most potential. So we can get 50, 100 a week sometimes in the busy periods, especially around book fairs, and sometimes it's quite quiet. And I can't possibly read any of those. So having an agent who pitches your books well and also sends them to the right people. There are agents who will send you 10 books a month of all different areas of the genre, or even not in anywhere near your genre, because they haven't bothered to really learn what editors like what. And then there are some agents who you get one thing from a year, so you know this is worth reading. So that kind of hierarchy of what to read is kind of based on who the agent is. It's based on the pitch, which again feeds into how good the agent is. I mean, often I won't read things because the pitch is almost identical to something I already have, and it's nothing against the book. It's just I have quite a intentionally limited list so that everybody gets their own space, I suppose. And I've read many manuscripts that I thought were excellent, and I've said no purely because, and then I go on and see them published elsewhere, and I'm very pleased, but I just know that I couldn't give them the space they needed. So that's quite a large part of my job. I think that's probably certainly the part people think I do most of. But then actually probably more is line editing manuscripts. And I think every publisher has a different way of doing that. For me, it's buying a book, reading it, sending an author away with pages of notes to rewrite it on their own. And then they'll send it back and I'll read it again. It may be that then I go straight into line editing, or they may have to have it again to do rewrites. And then sort of we work on it together, and only when we're both very happy with it will it pass the managing editor, who will arrange copy editing and arrange, proofreading and things like that. But the actual process of my part of the editing can often take between back and forth several months. It really depends what stage the book is at.
And then when you've received a book from an agent, what was it you look for? And because you've got, obviously you say you go on to do line edits, so what kind of how much level of polish do you expect there to be? How much work do you look for, and how do you know what needs fixed and how to fix it?
I don't always. Sometimes you read a book and you like the voice and you like what's going on, but there's just big flaws in the plot or the logic of how the story fits together. And sometimes you think, oh, I can see exactly what that needs. And my experience, 9 times out of 10, if I say that, they then go somewhere else, like HarperCollins, with my ideas, which has happened 3 times. So I have to be careful now. But sometimes you just go, this is not something I know how to fix. And it's not worth, the money I can make is probably not worth the time I would spend to turn this into a book which is just about okay. But I suppose I look for a degree of polish. It's always worrying if a book comes riven with typos, because that means the author does a lot of typos, but also the agent doesn't care enough to run that through their processes to fix it. And the first book is almost always the most polished book you're going to get from an author, because that's the one the agent's gone out with and worked with them on and made sure is the best it can be. It's book 2 where the author tends to on their own. The agent has got their cut already and has moved on to their other authors for doing a new deal, and they are less likely to read book 2, and it's not going to go through that polishing process before it gets to me. So there has to be a certain amount of time, cost, benefit analysis with all these things.
Yeah. And how important, obviously it's very important. I was going to ask about the market. Obviously the market is key to deciding presumably what you're going to take on and what you're not going to take on. But given the length of time that it can take from you receiving a book to actually coming out in the shops and stuff, how do you judge the market? How do you know where the market's going to be at that point?
I mean, obviously you don't. For Viper, my kind of ethos is to do what I haven't been able to do in previous jobs, which is to just buy books that I like. Obviously, if a book I like, but I think I have no way to sell this, then I don't buy it. But if I think it has potential and I like it, then that's kind of what I go. And it's quite rare that I feel that way. I mean, I read a lot of manuscripts and a lot of them are perfectly good, but they're perfectly good in a way that I can't make them stand out from the crowd as an independent publisher. I can't take an average book and through the power of a 6-figure marketing spend, make people buy it. And there are plenty of books that come out there every year and people kind of go, God, it's everywhere. Have you read it? It's a bit crap. Publishers will stand in corners in meetings go, did you read that? Oh my God, it's terrible. Because there is a huge power in the marketing spend. Of course there is. It's a product. So my books hopefully have a quality that means they can stand out for the crowd without always spending that kind of money. I don't think I've ever spent 6 figures on marketing.
And do you accept unsolicited submissions? Or does it have to come through an agent for you guys, or do you take authors out there who are just looking to send something in?
If we took unsolicited, we'd take it would just be vast. If I know the author personally and I've worked with them before, then I would take it and I would read it. Though obviously it's always more difficult if you're talking to someone one-to-one and say, I don't want your book. So I have taken them if they're from authors I've already worked with, because at least then I know the quality and I have a base level. But somebody I've never met and I have no connection with, no. It would set a bad precedent. And also an agent, I think, is very important, because not only does it give a professional layer for things like royalties and advances, and it means they get, it's more to protect the author than it is to me. But also sometimes you have to have very difficult conversations with authors, and it is better to be able to talk to an agent about how to couch those things, or sometimes in some contexts it's just to do it through an agent. If you're deciding that you're not going to publish any more of their books, or that the book they've written isn't good enough, the agent, I think, is a very valuable tool in that.
And in your role, are you, if you look at the whole process of publishing, authors are trying to attract agents, and agents are presumably trying to attract the right editors to then take the books. But are you at the top of the tree then in that, or who are you having to persuade in your role?
Well, I have to persuade the authors to want to work with me, which doesn't always work. But I think it depends. There's a dynamic with some agents are just superstars. They will send a manuscript and they're not going to accept less than a certain amount of money. If you haven't got that kind of money in the budget, then you might as well not read the book, because you'll just get sad. So they definitely have a power and sort of a pull that means they will send something out, and every editor who gets it will just drop everything and read it. But also, you are, especially once you've got authors who are doing very well, we all know authors who, the more books they write, the longer the books get and the less edited they seem.
Who could you be referring to?
There are some authors who are well known, they just will not be edited. They just won't do it. And you can either accept that they will have ropey plots, or you can say you don't want to work with them. But I'm always mistrustful of an author who doesn't want to be edited. I agree, no one wants to be sort of hacked and sliced, but publish it yourself if you don't want anyone to touch it.
How do those conversations go? Do you tend to find most authors are receptive to notes and things like that, or do you get into difficult conversations sometimes about what needs to be done if they want to publish it?
I've certainly had difficult conversations with authors. Certainly on my list now, the kind of person the author is a significant part of my thought process when I decide whether or not to offer for a book. Because it's a small stable of authors. They've ended up kind of creating a weird cabal against me on Twitter, as far as I can tell. And because of that, in a sense, they kind of are representing us more than maybe if you were being published by a very large publishing house. So I need to know that it's somebody who I can sort of jog along with reasonably well. They don't have to be my best friends, but I need to know that I can tell them the truth and that they will do what needs to be done. Because if they don't trust me, then it's just not going to work, really. But yes, sometimes you do have to have very difficult conversations. I find the best way to have those is to be prepared, is to show that you've written 30 pages of notes and this is the logic for everything. And then you're not just going, oh, well, I skimmed it on my phone and I think, quite honestly, that character's rubbish and you should get rid of them. It's gutted your whole book.
Yeah.
No one enjoys that.
And you also will work on the blurb of a book and the cover of the book, etc. And I wondered what goes into the cover. You know, how do you decide what image suits a book, and how many people need to weigh in on that decision?
Oh God, so many. I mean, a cover is done by the editor. Will write a cover brief, which will contain sort of quite a detailed synopsis. Normally you will have all the copy you're going to put on the cover, including taglines. You want to put in, like, you know, holding quotes like, this is an amazing book by an amazing author, so the designer knows to leave space for all that text and what's going to go where. And you will also tell them who the target market is, who the primary retailers are going to be. Is this more a supermarket book? Is this more a Waterstones front table book? You know, this for women aged 30 to 65, which is the best period to, you know, which is the biggest reading slot. You want those women aged 30 to 65 because they're the ones going to Waterstones because they're having to buy the birthday present for their child's friend from school, or they're the ones doing the supermarket shop, sadly, because mostly them. So yeah, you want that particular market. And then you will provide comp titles. So you will go on Amazon and you will find a book that's similar to the book you have, and then you will go, people also bought, and you will end up in an Amazon spiral of doom, finding competing titles so that the designer can get a flavor. You know, what kind of fonts, is this a serif or a sans serif kind of book? Is it bold colors? Is it muted? Is it you know, a drawn cover, or is it photoreal, or is it just text, or whatever? So you give them as much information as they can. Some designers don't mind if you steer them quite actively. Some of them are like, leave me with the words, and I shall present you with something. And they will eventually come back with normally a few very different directions for a kind of book.
Do they get to read the book, or is it just the information you're giving them?
It depends. I mean, there's always the option, if the book manuscript is available,
yeah,
and they want to read it, we will always make it available to them. Sometimes, and the problem is with covers, you're often working. I mean, we're currently working on March 2023 right now. We've briefed in the cover for Catriona Ward's next book, which is a March 23 title, and we only got the manuscript in a week ago. So I've finished reading it approximately 4 hours ago. So we couldn't give them anything. We had a detailed outline, which we gave to the designer, but we were kind of just going on vibes and hand waving, really. But then once we have lots of directions, that will go to a covers meeting, and everybody will have opinions. So head of marketing, head of sales, head of export, because export and UK sales obviously have very different tastes a lot of the time, and head of publicity, head of editorial, and we'll all have strong opinions. And invariably, sales will just shake their head and go, "Does it look like a crime book?" And marketing will go, "Bigger type." And publicity will go, "Can we have a bigger shout line?" And editorial will go, "Well, actually, that's the wrong kind of dog. The dog in the book is a Labrador, and that's a Retriever. It doesn't matter. No one will care. I'm just saying." And you just go round and round in circles until you eventually. I mean, personally, I am generally happy to bow to marketing and sales, because, quite frankly, it doesn't matter how beautiful the cover is if sales say, "I can't. This book doesn't match the insides, and I can't sell it."
Does the author have any input into that at all?
They should. Our process is that when we have a cover that in-house we are happy with, we will send it to the author. And normally, if we've done our job, the author will go, "That's great. That is the essence of my book. Thank you." A couple of times I've had authors come back and go, "I really hate it. I'm sorry. I don't like it." And both times that's happened to me, they were absolutely right, and I didn't like it either. And it gave me an excuse to go back to the meeting and go, "It's all wrong. It's all wrong." The author hates it. They don't have right of refusal for our contracts. Some publishing houses do. The authors are able to veto a cover. Ours don't, because with the best will in the world, an author is good at writing books. They do not know what will get into Tesco. And in a year's time, when they get their royalty statement, they'll want it to go into Tesco. But I would always listen. And often the authors have good points. They'll go, "Oh, well, I like it, but actually, I don't know about that colour." And we'll take it back. And often just means the designer will do 3 versions with different colours. And the author will go, oh no, you were right, that first colour was great. Or we'll go, oh, the author's right, that colour is better.
Yeah.
So it should be a decision for everybody. But I would say in the end, if sales think they can't flog it, then that's banned. Then you should do what the head of sales says.
Well, then, I mean, that kind of comes on to marketing, because that's a massive part of the book. And I'd imagine leading up to the launch of a book is the biggest kind of push. But ideally, throughout the book's life, there's going to be some element of marketing. And how do you decide what the strategy is for a book? How do you decide where to allocate the funds, whether it's a kind of billboard for some books or it's a push in a magazine somewhere else? So how does that work?
Well, I can't speak to the marvels that the marketing department do with any great knowledge. I can just watch what they do and be pleased. But obviously, different books have different readerships. So, say I've got a book in front of me. What is it? It's The Appeal. There we go. The Appeal. Oh yeah, because I was reading her third book and I was trying to remind myself what hellish formatting I did in this book. But this book, because it had not a cozy, it's been called cozy, it's not particularly cozy. It's more, I think of it as bloodless brain box crime. But it has that puzzle aspect. So a lot of the marketing went towards the Sunday Times readership, people who like crosswords. That generation went on Facebook advertising because, that's where they live. So it's kind of it's more about who the readership is, to where you funnel your marketing. I suppose it really depends. I mean, there are some books where we do a lot more on, say, Instagram. That may be because the book itself is very Instagrammable. It may be because the readership is younger, or it may be because the author has a very strong Instagram presence. So they will always look at the author and where they are and on what platforms and what they can do to kind of judge where their budget is best spent.
Is there an onus, though, on authors these days to market the books perhaps more than they could have done previously because of the existence of social media and how big it is and stuff like that?
I think so. I think it's seen as free. I mean, it's not free because an author's time is not free. Mm-hmm. No one's time is free. But there's definitely more. I mean, I like all my authors to be on Twitter. Just because it gives people a place to find you, and it introduces them to the crime community, which is, I think, one of the most sort of fun, but also just the most active parts of book Twitter. The crime readers are brilliant. The crime bloggers are really, really active, and the authors tend to be quite active as well. So just the more people you know in the community, the more likely you are to go to conventions, the more likely you are to people to see you, to buy your books, to buy book 3 because they saw you reading at a panel and then they go and buy the backlist. I don't know really how much concrete income that will generate, because essentially if you get a spread in the Times Saturday magazine, that is going to do far more than years of doing conventions. But I think it gives them, I understand that writing is a lonely occupation and it's nice to make friends. And if you keep to that very small part of book Twitter, you can make nice friends.
Twitter's a lovely place if you don't go beyond the small walls of, And okay, so once a book's come out then, obviously the hope is that it will sell well and will reach a big audience. But how do you judge whether a book is successful or not? Is it purely about the earning up the advance, or would you consider a book with poor sales but a strong critical response as a success?
I think it depends on the genre. Say in literary fiction, something getting a really strong critical response, and if it doesn't really make any money, I think that's more accepting on the basis that the more books they do, the more they will grow. You're building, and their backlist will be evergreen, essentially. Personally, I consider a book successful if it makes a decent profit overall. It's kind of like a profit loss ratio. There's not an absolute, if a book doesn't sell 10,000 copies, then it's failed. If I paid £30,000 for a book and it sells 10,000 copies, I'm pissed. If I paid £5,000 and it sold 10,000 copies, I am very happy, because it's all about the relative profit for me. But also, I think there's often a lot of pressure, the idea that every book has to make money immediately. Every author has to make money on their first book. And which is nonsense, really. If you think an author is a really good writer, eventually they will probably become profitable, unless they're writing in a very, very tiny part of the market. And also, it's kind of your job to do so. You know, if an author's not really selling in hardback and you're wasting this money on printing very expensive hardbacks, then maybe you're publishing them wrong. Maybe you need to be going straight to B format, but you also need to be upping your spend online to get the digital sales. You know, everyone, you know, maybe their readership don't want it in hardback. So there's a certain amount of responsibility for publishers, obviously. But I mean, say our author, Cat Ward, she did 2 books with another publisher. She says she was in negative sales. I don't know if that's true. But she's done
the book.
But she's done very well for us with her 3rd book. And the first 2 books are really good. There's no lot, you know, those books should have sold really well. But if nobody wanted her 3rd book, then nobody would have had them. You know, sometimes you just have to trust, you know, with your wizened little publishing heart, that eventually a really good author will find their audience, and you just have to wait.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting, like, we don't need to focus on Cat too much, but, you know, there's someone that hasn't sold well with the first 2 books, but they were good books. What was it that made you think, right, I want to try and back her and make a success out of this?
I mean, I don't, in a sense, it was partly because just the book was so fantastic and I hadn't read anything like it. And that was kind of what I wanted Viper to be. I wanted it to be commercial, but I also wanted to have books that were just a little bit different so they could stand out. And that book, you know, it starts with a talking cat. It definitely stands out. But also I thought that because it had such a good pitch, and by the end, people would go, oh, and if you then get to the end of the book and you read it again and you read it all the way through, knowing what you know at the end, it's just such an enjoyable experience. And I know this, having read it like 5-6 times through the various editorial bits. So I thought it had a really good potential for marketing. And our marketing was essentially, we can't say anything about this book. You just have to read it. And you don't get that many chances to go with you just have to read it pitch, because people go, I did, it was a bit shit. You know, you have to hold your fire on that so good you've got to read it pitch. But also I knew that Kat had a lot of connections in the author world. You know, lots of authors thought she was great because she was great. And I thought that if we started early enough, we did proofs far earlier than necessary. We had authors very kindly reading the Word document, not even proofs. You know, they gave up the time, they read a Word document on their phones, and which meant that we had quotes to put on the proof. So before authors even got the proof, you know, we had Joe Hill, we had Joanne Harris, we had all these people who would, so it kind of made it, the buzz started very, very early. And that was the only way we could really make that book work, was to create such a buzz that people would buy a book with a talking cat that we couldn't tell them anything about. And then Stephen King got on the bandwagon, which, to be honest, I mean, that helped.
I mean, there must be so many stuff like that where you don't have any control over it, but it just kind of serendipity happens. It gets in front of the right person at the right time, and you get a line from them, and you think, this is just, everything's aligning now for this book, and you can just kind of push.
Well, that one, I went into the office in the middle of lockdown and like hand printed out the books, and then our office manager went like round the corner and had them two of them hand bound, one for Stephen King and one for Joe Hill, and then we like FedExed them to the States. It was a little stressful. But thanks to lovely Gillian who arranged that, because she is the reason we got that quote.
And awesome. When you sign an author, generally, I'm assuming that you'll sign them for more than one book, or do you sometimes just sign it per book? What's the approach?
I prefer to sign up for 2, at least, because otherwise you're not. It's a bit weird to just do one, because if you think an author is good and you want to build their career, then you should do at least 2. Also, if the first book does really well, then bloody Penguin can come in and swoop and take book 2, and all your hard work is so I prefer 2.
Sorry, I'm just going to say your video's frozen.
Yeah, I see that. I should stop the video and I'll start it again. See if that makes any difference. There we go.
There we go. Excellent.
So what books do Viper have coming soon that people should be looking out for?
Ooh.
That you can say?
Well, obviously, just everything. I'm trying to think of what proof's going out, because I've been on maternity leave. I'm now back part-time, but I'm still in that stage where I'm having to claw back. I'm like, no, it's mine now, give it back. But I think people will be quite excited by Guy Morpuss's second book, which is in September this year, Black Lake Manor, which is kind of an Agatha Christie like closed room in a murder mystery house in the middle of nowhere, except people can rewind time. So your detective will solve the murder, and then somebody rewinds time and they have to do it all over again, but they get a different solution, which is the right one. So that's kind of a sort of Agatha Christie speculative. And then, of course, I hope people will be excited for the third book by Janice, which is in January next year, which is called The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels, which features two true crime journalists, both trying to go after the same story, which is that of a cult called the Alperton Angels, who stole a newborn baby 18 years ago and were trying to sacrifice it as the Antichrist. Both were then foiled and killed and then committed suicide ritually. But now, 18 years later, finally, the Alperton baby is of an age where they can be interviewed. So both these true crime writers battling to try and find the baby, and also to solve the mysterious case of the Alperton Angels. And in true Janice fashion, it's got 400 billion layers, and it made my eyes bleed editing it. But it wouldn't be a Janice book if it didn't.
We just had Janice on the podcast, actually, and she didn't give us that.
We specifically asked her what was next, and she didn't say anything. So.
The last time I did a podcast with Janice, somebody asked her to talk about, I think it was the Twyford Code book 2, and she kind of went, "Oh, what's about that?" And I was like, "No, Janice, this is the pitch." I just did it for her. She was like, "Oh, it's so good you're here." But no, that's okay. She writes the books and I write the pitches.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah. And Viper obviously had great success. Is it last week? Wait, 2 weeks ago? Imprint of the year.
It feels like a long time ago.
The nibbles? The
nibbies. It's because it's in the shape of a nib. I have it somewhere. I don't know where I put it. I put it up high because I found my daughter using it to use it for her Lego figures.
Nice.
Oh no, it was. There it is. Yeah, see, it's a nibby, so it looks like a nib. That's very cool.
Yeah, that must have been quite an exciting moment, especially for a new imprint that you've kind of built from scratch. That must have been quite a gratifying moment. Yeah, I mean, it was. I was quite shocked. I'm glad the cameras didn't zoom in my face, because I was like. Because you always have the people who you think are going to win. And I thought that we were too young, and just not, the list wasn't big enough, or we'd had sort of 3 big money makers. But I thought, I didn't realize we'd made as much of an impact as we obviously had, which is nice. And it means that authors who I like are more likely to read our books, which is good. And people who, agents are sending me stuff they probably wouldn't have sent me before.
Yeah.
I mean, more fool them, but still, it's it's difficult when you're going up against the big 4 publishers.
Yeah.
So you have to offer something a bit different. I mean, I will throw money around, but I hope that maybe it's more sort of the atmosphere, the one-to-one kind of relationship I can offer, which will appeal to people.
And just before we finish the main questions, on that point about money and the offers that you're making authors and stuff like that, I mean, how do you feel under pressure when you're trying to think of the right figure? And obviously, do you sometimes think, is that too much? Is that too little? How do you pitch it correctly?
Well, you have a very big spreadsheet. I mean, it's not so that you don't pull it out of the air.
No, yeah.
You predict based on other similar books and based on what but books you publish, books that obviously we can look at BookScan sales, we can see what other publishers' books have sold, at least through tills. We can't tell what they've sent out, but we can see what's physically gone through tills. So you get a rough idea of what you're going to sell in hardback and paperback and ebook and export paperback. And you kind of assess what price point you want. Is this a debut? Do you want to do the hardback at $12.99 to get people in? Is this an established brand that you can go up to $16.99? And then once you plug in all those numbers, a number will be spat out which says the maximum advance for them to earn out. And then you can see what the maximum advance would be to still hit whatever margin you want. Do you want to hit a 20% margin or a 10% margin? So you can see how much money you can afford to spend if it sells what you think it will sell. And I'm never comfortable veering too far from that. I mean, there have been times where I've kind of gone below what I could offer max because I feel like there's quite a bit of risk. And obviously you never want to overpay, because if you pay more than the book is worth, the pressure is essentially on the author, and they may not realize that, but everybody in the company will know how much you paid for it. They will know what it has to hit. And if it doesn't, then there's always that kind of last book didn't wash its face. For book 2, do we double down? Do we spend as much on marketing, or do we just pull back a bit? That's always going to be a discussion. I mean, books are obviously seen as quite fluffy, but it is a product that we have to sell. Yeah,
no, totally. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Well, I mean, those were the main questions that we had for you, but we like to end every podcast by asking our guests the same questions. The first of which is, what was the last book that you read that you can tell us about?
Well, the last book I read was terrible, and I stopped at like quarter of the way through. So
you have to tell us now.
No.
You can tell us that after the recording. Yeah,
it just didn't make any sense. I thought half the book was missing. I was like, what? Just gave up. I was still at a stage where my son was waking up quite a lot. I mean, the last book I read was Cat Ward's new book, but that was a first draft, so I can't say anything about that. Before then, anybody who's got a very young baby knows the reading becomes a little less possible, and all you want to do when you're not looking after them is watch YouTube videos about cake decorating. If you're me. But the last book I really, really enjoyed. Ooh. Going blank. Oh, I read an old Steve Mosby. I think it was Dark Flowers.
Oh, cool.
I thoroughly recommend his backlist. I think I read that twice now.
I've not read any of his stuff, I don't think.
Yeah, his backlist before he became Alex North.
Is that Alex? Oh, I know that Alex North. I didn't realize that was. Okay, is that who did he have to before that? Okay, that's interesting.
His books are very dark and very beautiful, and he's one of the few crime authors I reread.
Excellent.
Cool. This might be a bit easier then. What was the last film that you watched?
Ocean's 11 on my phone. It's because I was listening to a podcast about Ocean's 11.
Okay.
And I hadn't seen it for 10 years, and it was on Amazon Prime. So I was like, oh, yeah, that is a fun film. I'll watch that again.
Why did you watch it on your phone though?
Oh, because I was like putting the baby to bed, and then I was cooking dinner, and then I was just sitting on the sofa, and I couldn't bother to turn the TV on. My phone has a little stand, so it can just stand up on flat surfaces.
Yeah.
As the director intended, obviously.
Yes. Soderbergh, he would have been completely approved.
And last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Stranger Things and Modern Family.
Yep.
It's like one episode of Stranger Things and then go to bed on one episode of Modern Family.
Yeah, we're doing a binge of Modern Family with my kids, one of whom is definitely too young to watch Modern Family, but
really, it's quite sexy.
I know it. Sometimes I'll see the description of the episode, and me and my wife will sort of try and distract them so I can quickly skip to the next episode to avoid that one.
Well, the one I just watched, Gloria pretended to be a prostitute for like a role-playing Valentine's Day get together. So watch out for the later seasons.
Yeah, I'll watch out for that.
Yeah, we're watching Stranger Things just now, and it's fantastic, but it's a lot scarier, and
it's a lot more gruesome,
gorier than it was.
So gory.
Yeah.
Surprise! While I was watching, I was like, "This season 1 wasn't like this."
Definitely a step. I can see the Modern Family before bedtime
with the feet,
yes,
and I was just like, what?
Yeah.
Also, the mechanics of that make no sense. Like, what is he doing? Skin slippage does not work like that. And then he's like walking around going, la la la.
I know.
La, la.
I'll be honest. I've had so many questions watching that. How is he going on and off? How does
this help? Because then it was back on.
What did the
again.
hammer do? Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea.
I have no idea what you're talking about because I'm watching.
We're not making any spoilers. This is very much the B thread they put in to make the adults do something. It's not very good.
Last question, I've just answered this TV show you're watching. So this is the last thing we do, the super quick fire, either or. And I always say there's no right answer apart from one, but we'll start off with an easy one: sci-fi or crime?
Crime.
TV or cinema?
TV these days.
Night owl or early bird?
Natural night owl, forced to be early bird by infants.
Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
I don't get to do much of either. Fancy restaurant.
Nice. And the last one, real book or ebook?
Real book.
Ebook?
No, real book. Book.
I thought you said ebook.
No, the thing is, ebook, Kindle is for work. I read submissions on my Kindle. I read real books, which are for pleasure. And I can't mix them because if I pick up my Kindle, I'll start working.
So what you're saying is they're both a winner in your eyes?
They're both a winner, but they're very different. They're very different things.
That's a point each. That's fine.
But financially, ebooks, because they cost £120 to make. And then Amazon will just take a slice, but you don't have to print them or warehouse them. So financially speaking,
no, you're giving
no. Ebooks a winner. That's fine. We'll cut it out. Cut the mics.
This is one of the rare victories for Tarek in this quiz.
I think that's 4 people now we've had in podcast.
As a publisher, ebook, please.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Miranda. That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah, that was great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.